Are Video Games Worth Their Creation? By Mackenzie Erding. So, what are video games? Well, here's a brief history background to video games. So, they began around the mid 20th century and it had a relatively slow start. However, they did become increasingly popular once they became a commercial product. And this, of course, goes towards arcades for the video games, and then home game consoles, and then even onto computers. All right, so the first video game can be traced back to 1947, or at least the idea of it can be traced back to 1947 with the filing of the patent number 2455992. And the first actual video game by our definition would be Space War, which was created in 1962. And this was just mainframe games that were, just found in university laboratories and communities of, game players and programmers. And then there's a man named Ralph H. Barr, and he, in 1966, was the inventor of the new use of television sets, and they began developing his Brown Box series. And the series of prototypes he produced would lead to the first home video game console, which was called the Magnavox Odyssey in 1972. And the Odyssey actually included 12 built-in games, along with colored screen overlays, playing cards, and even dice. And then even new versions of the Odyssey would appear and come out more and more. Once it came up until 1978, it kind of died down. And one extra interesting thing I actually wanted to point out was just a few interesting facts that I learned from Entertainment Software Association, their survey in 2017 that gave a few quick facts. The first being 65% of households have at least one member who plays games 3 hours a week or more, and the average gamer is about 35 years old. And then the next one being of the actual gaming population, there are more adult women, about 31%, than boys under 18%, which is pretty interesting to me because I am a woman. I'm 19, so it's kind of interesting to see that. And then also of people who play video games, 59% are male and 41% are female. Moving on to positive effects in gaming. The first acknowledgement goes to the attention effect. Studies include in a review that show that video game players displays improvements in several types of attention, including sustained attention and selective attention. The regions of the brain that play a role in attention are more efficient in gamers compared to non-gamers, and they even require less activation to stay focused on demanding tasks. Evidence also demonstrates that playing video games increases the size and competence of parts of the brain responsible for different skills like visuoscopal. It's a person's ability to identify visual and spatial relationships among objects. As well as this, they require less activation to stay focused on demanding tasks. And I would also like to point out another thing I learned, that studies show that youth violence has consistently declined as these games have become available. A study out of Boston University found that youth violence rates dropped 29% between 2002 and 2014, and that youth violence rates spiked from 1980 to 1994, according to the Urban Institute, but those rates started to plummet in the 1990s, which was dropping 34% between 1994 and 2000. So I just want to point out that this is just a correlation and nothing else. It does not mean that games cause violence rates to drop, but it also doesn't support the idea that violent games are creating, as many people would say, monsters or problematic kids. And when I am speaking about these kids, what I mean is that school shooters cannot be directly linked to the kids that are playing these games. In fact, many studies have shown that school shooters are less likely to be violent gamers or to even play games at all. Of course, we do have to take into effect the negative effects that come with playing video games, and this really includes violence. And there are three main ones that I'll be talking about, and that's cognitive aggression, aggressive behavior, and pro-social behavior. So in respect to aggression, violent video game effects have successfully demonstrated that there is a link between playing video games and the inducement and reinforcement of these aggressive feelings and behaviors that come with it. To start, aggressive cognition studies have demonstrated that there is indeed a relationship between violent video game playing and aggressive priming, activation of aggressive scripts and knowledge structures, and even hostile attribution bias compared to non-violent video game exposure. So even a lab-based study just recently sought out to examine violence in a desensitization and its potential increase in aggressive behavior, and it did in fact show that these kids that play these games are tending to be a little bit more aggressive than others. And then regarding pro-social behavior, it does include empathy and helping or rewarding others, as well as researchers, having demonstrated a decrease in pro-social behavior on part of players that play these violent video games, and how they feel not such a need to help others because of this. But what it comes down to is it was really just only a link. I do also want to point out that playing these video games, whether you're young or old, it does change the brain structure more significantly in younger kids than it does older. Of course, that goes for saying with violent video games or even without, in that it goes so far as to have them call these kids video game addicts and even create this thing called a gaming disorder that is now added to its official list of mental health conditions, stating that gaming behavior could qualify as problematic if it interferes with, of course, significantly interferes in other people's lives, and that goes without saying. And now moving on to what does this mean for students and how can we learn from this information? In the third slide, I did talk about, what are the positive effects and all that. And, of course, they do say that, there are improvements in attention and staying active, and how aggravated assault charges have been dropping significantly, as well as, school shooters aren't, really playing violent games, and that can't really be totally correlated. And of course, there are tons of other articles on the negative effects of gaming that do prove that there is an aggression that comes with these games, and how it does change a child's mind in a specific way, and that these can be addicting. And, I do believe that not everyone is bad because they play video games, and not everyone is good because they play video games either. I do think recognize the correlations and learn from them, learn from the mistakes of others. And interactive games can be great, and that there's just good and bad in everything. And I really think that as a good person, you really need to just take a step back and recognize all of these, and you should be fine when it comes to interactive gaming. Alrighty, thank you so much for listening, and these are my references if you would like to look them up and do some further reading. Have a good one.